За 4 дня
In just 4 days, more than 900,000 people passed by Lenin's coffin in silence and mourning.
January 27, 1924, Lenin's funeral takes place in Moscow. Braving the bitter cold and a relentless blizzard, an overwhelming crowd gathers to pay their final respects to the leader of the Soviet proletariat.
поезд за поездом.
Trains from Leningrad and other cities are departing one after another, carrying delegations to attend Lenin's funeral across our vast country.
A special delegation arrived from Kazakhstan as well, led by Saken, a writer, public figure, and chairman of the Council of People's Commissars. This was a clear sign of the Kremlin Bolsheviks' deep trust in him, but Lenin's funeral would become a pivotal moment in the power struggle within the Communist Party. The system of collective leadership and decision-making in the Central Committee would gradually be dismantled as Stalin seized absolute control. One by one, Lenin's old comrades, the veteran Bolsheviks, would be labeled enemies of the people and eliminated. Revolutionary leaders in the Soviet republics faced a similar fate. Saken Seifullin, a key figure in Kazakhstan's revolutionary movement and a poet and activist, was also declared an enemy of the people and executed.
Да, в лице Сакена Сейфуллина мы потеряли.
Indeed, we lost an extraordinarily talented writer and poet in Saken Seifullin, but his true legacy goes far beyond his literary achievements. As soon as he was elected chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, he restored our people's rightful name, Kazakh. Under Tsarist Russia, we were called Kyrgyz. Thanks to Seifullin, our original name was officially reinstated, and Kazakhs became Kazakhs again.
Снова стали казахами.
Saken Seifullin's contemporaries often highlighted not just his sharp intellect and great sense of humor, but also his striking looks and masculine charisma. He was tall with well-defined features and an athletic build. The writer Galina Serebryakova once described him. He looks like a Persian knight straight out of a fresco, missing only the chainmail and curved sword. Saken owed his good looks to his mother, Jamal. It was she who lovingly nicknamed her son Sadwakas. Saken, the name by which he would later go down in history. His father, Seifullah, was a prosperous man who ran the Koyande Fair, one of the largest markets of its time. The fair wasn't just a bustling trade center connecting merchants from China, Russia, and Central Asia. It also served as a gathering place where key figures of Kazakh society met to discuss pressing issues of the day.
Вот это ярмарки, вы знаете, в 1905 году.
It was at this fair in 1905 that over 4,500 people came together to write a petition to the Tsar. This famous Karkaroli petition sparked the revolutionary changes across Kazakhstan. It's no surprise that this region became the birthplace of prominent figures like Alikhan Bokikhanov, Zhekip Akpayev, one of Kazakhstan's first lawyers, Alimkhan Yermekov, and many other key leaders. This was the cradle of the first democratic movements in the country. Saken's father, Seifullah, and Ahmed Baitursunov, the director of a Kazakh school in the region, were actively involved in these events as well. Wealthy patrons of the time supported scholars, schools, madrasas, and mosques. Seifullah, Saken's father, was one such benefactor, supporting Baitursunov's school.
Seifullah often brought young Saken along to the fair. The sights and sounds of such a lively place were unforgettable, sparking his imagination and shaping his artistic view of the world.
Из воспоминаний Сакена Сейфуллина.
From Saken Seifullin's memoirs, on those long nights of late autumn and harsh winter, sitting by the hearth while blizzards howled over the hills, there was always music and singing. From as long as I can remember, the aitis, songs, and stories would pour into my soul like an endless stream, coming together to paint vivid, unforgettable pictures of life on the steppe. Seifullah spared no effort in ensuring his son received a solid education. Saken was sent to Akmola to attend a 3-year municipal school, a city that would later become a pivotal chapter in his life. It was there that his transformation into a staunch Bolshevik and revolutionary began to take shape.
Saken Seifullin с юности, конечно, он учился в Нельдинской школе, он учился...
Saken Seifullin's education began at the Neldi school, where he saw the early stirrings of industrialization and the first Kazakh workers in an industrial setting. Later, he moved to Akmolinsk to continue his studies at the Russian Kazakh school. One notable incident occurred during his time there. In 1912-1913, during the Balkan War between Turkey and Bulgaria, a fundraising effort was launched to support Bulgaria. Saken, however, stood up and declared that the Turks were Kazakhs' brothers and for that reason Kazakhs should refuse to contribute. Of course, the gendarmerie opened a case against him, branding him a Turkish patriot. And just like that, Saken became Turkish patriot.
Seifullin went on to study at the Teachers' Seminary in Omsk. While there, he and his peers founded a youth organization called Birlik, dedicated to spreading culture and education among Kazakhs. Their meetings were frequent and brimming with energy and emotion. Young poets and writers shared their verses, dreamed of a better future, debated passionately, and yearned for change with all their hearts.
Saken Seifullin öz zamanının şapşırak тұлғасы.
Saken Seifullin was a true luminary of his era, a guiding light, a patriot, a strategist, and a leader. His remarkable intellect and creative vision were already evident in 1914, when his poetry collection Bygone Days was published in Kazan. Among its works was the poem Who Will Lead the People, where Saken pondered what it truly means to be a leader. He believed that a leader should be a protector and a steadfast support for the people, someone who prioritizes the welfare of society, inspires progress, and steers the nation onto the right path. He was so young, yet he expressed such profound thoughts. Why did Saken become a communist? He came from a prosperous family, yet the ideals of the Communist Party, equality and socialism were undeniably compelling. It's a society where everyone contributes according to their abilities and is rewarded according to their work, guided by the moral code of communist builders.
Стоит вопрос, как так получилось, что Saken не оказался в Алашорде?
So why didn't Saken end up joining Alashorda? He wanted to. He was supposed to attend their congresses, first in the summer and then in December in Orenburg, but he never made it. The Akmolinsk gendarmerie kept him under constant surveillance, effectively keeping him confined. Eventually, he was arrested and imprisoned in Akmolinsk. Later, he was forced onto Annenkov's death trains.
Saken's disillusionment with the Tsarist regime deepened after he returned home to the Akmola region after his studies. The atmosphere was tense. In 1916, Tsar Nicholas II issued the requisition decree, ordering the conscription of 240,000 Kazakhs aged 19 to 43 for labor behind the front lines of World War I. The decree ignited widespread unrest, leading to one of the most significant uprisings of the 20th century in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, led by Amangildy Imanov.
From Saken Seifullin's memoirs, it's impossible to watch my people suffer. The anguished cries of mothers, elders, and brides ring in your ears, and you see young, strong men marching to their doom in battles against the Tsar's troops. It fills your soul with a suffocating darkness. You feel as though your heart might shatter from the grief, breaking with a soft, sorrowful echo, like the strings of a dombra snapping under too much tension.
Этот деревянный дом
This wooden house on the right bank of the capital is a well-known landmark for locals. It was here that Saken Seifullin once lived and worked, and today the street bears his name. After the 1917 revolution, Saken's public and literary journey began. Here he played a key role in establishing the Council of Peasant Deputies in Akmola, was elected to his presidium, helped found the youth party Jas Kazakh, and wrote his first revolutionary anthem, the Marseillaise of Kazakh youth. In 1918, Akmola, controlled by the Bolsheviks, was overtaken in a coup. White Cossack forces crushed the Reds and seized control. Then executions began with many communists shot on the spot. Saken and his comrades were rounded up and sent to Omsk prison. The hardships and horrors they endured during this time would later be brought to life in Seifullin's novel, The Thorny Path, which earned him widespread acclaim.
Before long, we began to notice that half the prisoners in the camp were gravely ill. Every day, 5 to 10 people died. Many were barely clothed, and the bitter winter cold and constant hunger had reduced them to shadows of themselves. Though the camp had started providing slightly better food just before we arrived, it was too late for many. The damage from prolonged starvation was irreversible. Then a typhus epidemic swept through the camp. Within 2 days of our arrival, nearly 40 of our comrades fell ill. The hunger, the cold, and the suffering they had endured left their mark. Swelling took hold of some. One fell, then another.
He escaped the camp, risking his life. Fortunately, by that time, power had shifted to the Bolsheviks, and from then, Saken Seifullin's career quickly gained momentum.
И он 9 месяцев он там пребывает.
He spent 9 months in prison, and during that time, his worldview began to shift. At first, he had placed his faith in the idea of a new democratic Russia. He believed in the strength of the Russian Empire, but those 9 months behind bars changed his perspective. He realized the true nature of Admiral Kolchak and Kerensky, that their policies were nothing more than a continuation of the old monarchist system. He also came to appreciate the vital role Alasharda had played in advancing Kazakhstan's democratic thought. However, their role had run its course, as it became clear that the Kazakh people's future no longer aligned with the empire. Saken drew his own conclusions.
At just 28, he was elected chairman of the Council of People's Commissars and later became a member of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee. On top of these roles, he took on the responsibilities of editor-in-chief for the journal Kazakhstan and the newspaper Yenbekshil Kazakhstan. Saken often spent time with everyday people, explaining the ideas of communism. The people trusted him and followed him.
Вот, как сейчас говорит, модно говорить, лидер общественного мнения, да?
He was a true leader, a figure we'd call a thought leader today. Saken was a devoted patriot who made significant contributions to the Kazakh people. During his time as chairman of the People's Commissariat, he introduced key decrees that laid the groundwork for Kazakhstan's future. He was instrumental in founding the Union of Writers of Kazakhstan, playing a pivotal role in its creation. Under Saken Seifullin's leadership, the foundation was laid for the cultural and industrial growth that would shape Kazakhstan's future.
Even with his demanding schedule, Seifullin remained prolific, publishing a collection of poems, the novel The Thorny Path, and his poem Lenin. He was also a strong supporter of Kazakh writers, using the Soviet press to promote their voices. One example of this is his letter to Bukharin, who was the editor of Izvestia at the time.
Dear Comrade Bukharin, Kazakhstan, which occupies a vast part of Central Asia with its Karaganda coal, amber oil, Altai gold, fertile grain fields, livestock farms, and the abundant fisheries of the Caspian and Aral seas, deserves a far greater presence in our literary landscape. And yet, Kazakh writers and poets are almost entirely absent from the pages of the all-Union press. To date, only 2 or 3 of Sabit Mukhanov's poems have been published in Izvestia. For the first time, I'm sending you a short essay inspired by my travels. If it finds a place in Izvestia, I would be happy to contribute more material in the future. I trust in your comradely support. With communist regards, Saken Seifullin, Kazakh poet and writer.
Например, экономические вопросы.
Take for instance his work on economic reforms. Saken reorganized the tax system, breaking it down into state, republican and local budgets. He introduced agricultural credit programs and, on April the 4th, issued a decree to establish Kazakhstan's civil aviation. When he traveled to Moscow to purchase aircraft, he was offered 10 P-2 planes, simple plywood models. But Saken wasn't one to settle for less. He insisted on getting the best. At the time, Moscow had imported German aircraft, the Junkers 13, a civilian plane widely regarded as one of the finest in the world. Instead of 10 P-2s, he chose to buy 2 Junkers planes. Although Saken wasn't a pilot himself, on October the 8th, 1923, he became the first Kazakh to board a plane. While in Orenburg, Saken also founded a school for Kazakh cavalry and supported the creation of aviation clubs, even providing funding. The cavalry school quickly filled with eager recruits, and to inspire them further, Saken became its honorary cadet. Aviation clubs, however, struggled to attract people at first. But over time they began to flourish, producing future legends such as Talgat Begaldinov, a two-time hero of the Soviet Union, and Khiaz Dospanova, Kazakhstan's famous aviatrix.
He had it all: success, looks, and fame, but he was endlessly lonely. Women loved him, but finding a happy relationship always seemed out of reach. That is until he met Gulbahram Batyrbekova. Their first encounter was in Petropavl, and she consumed his thoughts. Tall, fair-skinned, with long black braids, she stole his heart in an instant. After returning to Akmola, he began writing her long letters filled with poetry, admiration, and even advice.
Do as you will, yet let others. Say this about you aloud. Your inner world is far richer than the finest and fanciest clothes. An empty soul holds little worth, its shimmering charms just for show, like a fruit with a radiant skin, but bitter within, as we know. Thus, these are the words of advice, my dearest, my muse, far away. For the city you live in feels distant, so far from the steps where I stay.
From Gulbahram's memoirs, Saken unexpectedly proposed to me. I gently turned him down, explaining that a simple girl from a village like me could never be a match for a man dressed in European-style clothes, with a hat and cane. And Saken said, if that's the issue, I'll stop wearing the hat and cane, and then ask if I'd at least allow him to write to me.
Конечно же, Гульбахрам сразу же тоже...
Gulbahram couldn't help a fall for Saken, but her father was strongly opposed to the marriage. Rumors of the writer's numerous romances had reached his ears, and he cautioned her. Seifullin is undoubtedly talented and well-respected, but being married to him won't be easy. If you choose this path, don't come crying to me later. After a long correspondence, Gulbahram finally accepted Saken's proposal and set off to join him in Akmola. Gulbahram's father's concerns weren't unfounded. Before long, the couple started facing challenges in their marriage. Saken was the center of attention for many women. Even so, both were determined to make it work. Despite his hectic schedule, Saken always tried to carve out time for his wife. Whenever they could, they would retreat to Saken's favorite place, Kokshetau, for the weekend. The breathtaking scenery never failed to inspire him. In fact, the beauty of Kokshetau became the muse behind many of his greatest works. In 1929, the Seifullin family celebrated a joyful and long-awaited event. Gulbahram gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Laura. The baby girl resembled her father, and Saken was utterly devoted to her, doting on her at every opportunity. He called her his medicine, his balm for the soul. Holding her in his arms, he felt his troubles fade, replaced by deep tenderness. Sadly, the child didn't live long, just 3 years. Gulbahram had gone to Moscow for her studies and took her daughter with her. There, the little one caught pneumonia, and they couldn't save her. Here's the family bidding farewell to their beloved girl. Saken's sorrow was indescribable. He could hardly cope with the loss, while Gulbahram, forever blaming herself for what had happened, tried to console him, saying, "Don't grieve too much. We'll have other children." In November 1936, Gulbahram gave birth to their son, Ayan, a name chosen by Mukhtar Awezov. Once again, the Seifullin household was filled with joy. Back then, leading the Council of People's Commissars was both a highly responsible and prestigious role, much like the position of a prime minister today. It came with significant powers, and Saken fully embraced them, using them to serve his people. One of his first acts was to restore the true name of his people, Kazakh.
Еще со времен Ивана Грозного.
Back in the time of Ivan the Terrible, the Kazakhs were stripped of their name, Kazakh, meaning free and independent. To avoid confusing us with the Siberian Cossacks, Russia unilaterally started calling us Kyrgyz, robbing us of our true identity. As a result, we became known as Kyrgyz by decree. Meanwhile, the actual Kyrgyz people were called Kara Kyrgyz or Wildstone Kyrgyz, Burut. Saken Seifullin, deeply troubled by this injustice, took action in 1922 when he was at the helm of the government. He argued that it was time for us to reclaim our rightful name, Kazakh, and correct the historical wrong because that name was ours. Even before the revolution, the great Abai had written, "O my Kazakhs," and the Kazakh intelligentsia, the Alasharda movement, had published the newspaper Kazakh. It was Saken who took the lead in making this change. On February the 15th, 1923, the article "Let's call a Kazakh and correct the mistake" was published. That moment marked the start of a concerted effort to restore the name of the Kazakh people and promote the Kazakh language in public institutions and official paperwork. Let's become literate, educate ourselves properly, pursue a good education, and follow the right path. Let's fuel our enthusiasm and sincere desire to develop the Kazakh language. This was the philosophy of a true patriot of his nation. In his programmatic articles, Saken not only proposed ideas but also dedicated himself to bringing them to life. Let's begin developing the Kazakh language in our institutions, from the grassroots to the top, and from the top to the grassroots. Don't let a lack of resources discourage us. All we need is initiative, energy, and a firm resolve, as Seifullin urged.
И с этого момента НКВД ОГПУ установила слежку Сакена Сейфуллина.
From that moment on, the NKVD and OGPU kept a close watch on Saken Seifullin. And it continued for quite some time. During these years, as chairman of the People's Commissars, Saken had to assemble a government, 15 people in total. Of course, Moscow recommended well-educated and qualified individuals. However, Saken decided to take a different approach, suggesting why not include the all Kazakh intelligentsia. This was possible because in March 1919, Alasharda had been rehabilitated, and Saken, using Lenin's decree, appointed prominent figures to key positions. His first deputy was Ahmed Baytursunov, a history teacher and the leader of Alasharda, who took on the role of the People's Commissariat for Education or the Minister of Education. The second deputy of People's Commissariat for Justice was Ahmed Berimzhanov, a former member of the First and Second State Dumas and chairman of Justice in Alasharda. Saken also brought in Smagul Sadovkasov, Alimkhan Yermekov and Nigmet Nurmakov to handle crucial responsibilities. Even Isengali Kasabulatov, a former colonel in the Tsarist army, was appointed, despite being from Western Kazakhstan. Saken trusted him with finance and budgeting. Majid Chumbalov, a well-known doctor, was made head of the People's Commissariat for Health. Out of these 15 individuals, 40% were from Alasharda. Can you imagine the kind of government Saken had? It was unlike anything before. With this team, Saken issued the first decrees, including the Land Code in 1922. So what was the Land Code? Land had always been a central issue for every nation throughout history. Under the Tsars, the Cossacks had been granted land within 10 versts of rivers, and Kazakhs were forbidden from entering these territories. They couldn't access the most fertile riverbanks by the Volga, Ural, Irtysh or the Caspian Sea. Kazakhs, being nomadic herders, had no access to these essential lands. But Saken changed that, returning millions of hectares to the Kazakh people. He also addressed the long-standing dispute over the northern Akmola and Semey regions, which represented almost half of Kazakhstan.
Эта инициатива Сейфуллина на самом деле не понравилась многим.
Seifullin's initiative, in fact, didn't sit well with many. He only aroused more suspicion when he gave the go-ahead for a grand celebration of Ahmed Baytursunov's birth anniversary. Informers sent anonymous letters to the NKVD claiming that Seifullin was pretending to be a communist while secretly associating with Alasharda, the ideological opponents of the Bolshevik Party. In 1923, he also pushed through a decree that made Kazakh the official language for administrative matters in Kazakhstan. Seifullin served as the head of government for 3 years, from 1922 to 1925. Then Kazakhstan saw the arrival of the newly appointed first secretary of the Communist Party, Philip Goloshokin, who had previously led the operation to execute the Romanov family shortly before his appointment. When Goloshokin arrived in Kazakhstan, he wrote reports to his superiors claiming that the revolution hadn't reached the deeper layers of society. The old intelligentsia was still highly regarded, as evidenced by the recent celebration of Ahmed Baytursunov's birth anniversary. Young communists still saw him and Alikhan Bokikhanov as their spiritual leaders. So Goloshokin argued Kazakhstan needed its own version of October, a full-scale purge of the wealthy class, to quote, to prevent further decay within the party and Soviet ranks in Kazakhstan and to revitalize the stagnant atmosphere. On August 27, 1928, the decree on the confiscation of the estates of the rich was issued, marking the start of a horrific experiment, total collectivization which led to widespread poverty and the deaths of countless people. In 1927, Kazakhstan had around 40 million head of livestock. By 1932, that number had dwindled to just 5 million, a staggering loss of over 80%. According to official records, at least 1.8 million people lost their lives.
From Valery Mikhailov's documentary narrative Chronicle of the Great Famine, Goloshokin did in Kazakhstan what Pol Pot later did in Cambodia. Before the revolution, Kazakhs were the largest ethnic group among the Turkic peoples of Asia. Had it not been for the genocide carried out by the Soviet government, the Kazakh population today would have reached 40 to 50 million. What Goloshokin did in Kazakhstan can be compared to the devastation brought by the Dzungar invasion.
Kazakh intelligentsia sent letter after letter to the Kremlin, desperately trying to convey the scale of the disaster unfolding in the steppe. Meanwhile, Saken Seifullin released his poem The Red Horse, where the starving horse symbolized the suffering of the people under Goloshokin's brutal policies.
Поэма его «Кызыл ат», где он именно критикует.
His poem The Red Horse openly criticizes the Soviet government for its excesses. And that's what ultimately led to his persecution. It was a direct path to repression. Over time, some have suggested that he was somehow linked to the Alashorda movement. Even though he had personal friendships with many of its members, including Ahmed Baitursunov, one of its prominent leaders. They were on very good terms. It's important to note that labeling him a fierce enemy of Alash would be a mistake. While they had ideological differences, these never led to any major actions or conflicts.
Unfortunately, the Kazakh intelligentsia's position was dismissed by the communists, who criticized it as a nationalist display of bourgeois attitudes, overlooking all the supposed achievements of communism. However, in January 1933, the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party recalled Philip Goloshokin from the Republic. Later, for his excessive actions during the collectivization drive, he was executed on Beria's orders, but that would come much later. In 1941, as for the time being, Goloshokin managed to avoid the repressions that were sweeping through the Soviet Union.
Там же 3 пункта обвинения Сакену.
There were 3 main accusations against Saken. That he was an agent of Japanese imperialism, linked to Trotskyism, and a Kazakh nationalist. Now, Saken had never been to Japan. In 1923, when a devastating earthquake struck Tokyo, despite his modest means, Saken sent a small contribution to help the Japanese government. This act of kindness would come back to haunt him. 5 years ago, during the 120th anniversary celebrations in Astana, a message appeared on screen acknowledging Japan's gratitude for Kazakhstan's support at the time. As for his ties to Trotsky, that's well documented. He even composed a Dombre piece in honor of Trotsky. It's clear they had discussions when he visited Moscow. Later, Trotsky was exiled to Almaty in 1928-29. And it's said they spent time together, playing chess and conversing. The third accusation was his nationalism. Saken was a fierce defender of Kazakh culture and language. We are Kazakhs was his guiding principle. He also always advocated for Kazakhstan's territorial rights in political matters.
The year 1936 began with a sense of optimism. By then, the situation in the Republic, which had barely recovered from the aftermath of the Civil War and famine, had started to stabilize. The party decided to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the literary work of the people's writer, Saken Seifullin, on a grand scale. The Kazakh Central Executive Committee's decree was truly overwhelming for him. The name of Saken Seifullin will be given to the Semey Teachers Institute and the Kazakh Secondary School. A car will be provided for Seifullin's personal use. Around the same time in Moscow, Saken Seifullin became the first Kazakh writer to be awarded the prestigious Order of the Red Banner of Labor, presented to him by Kalinin himself.
А уже через 1,5 года он окажется в тюрьме.
A year and a half later, he would find himself behind bars, accused of plotting counter-revolutionary acts and engaging in nationalism. His fellow writers and political allies, Maylin, Jansugurov, Zhurgenov, and many others would share the same fate. This period would become infamous in history as the height of the Great Terror, or the Yezhovshchina, named after the head of the NKVD at the time, Nikolai Yezhov. Interestingly, he had known Seifullin since the 1920s, when he led the Semey Provincial Committee and served as the second secretary of the Kazakh Regional Committee of the Bolshevik Party. Once Yezhov took charge of the NKVD, he was responsible for the execution of 1.34 million people, nearly half of whom, 682,000, were put to death. It was under his reign that the intellectual elite of the Soviet republics was practically obliterated. Kazakhstan was turned into a giant labor camp. It's evident that both Yezhov and Beria were merely carrying out Stalin's orders. Stalin used terror as a tool to remove rivals from the highest levels of power, and on the ground, the same tactics were used. Under the guise of rooting out conspirators and spies, personal vendettas were settled and competitors eliminated.
Сводили счеты и устраняли конкурентов.
Saken Seifullin жары Gulbahram апай мынандай
Saken Seifullin's wife, Gulbahram, remembered. In August 1937, articles started appearing in Kazakhstanskaya Pravda and Socialist Kazakhstan, viciously smearing the leaders of Alash and many other influential political and cultural figures. Gulbahram said that Saken had a sense that his arrest was imminent. He always carried a small bag with him, whether he was at home, at work, or even visiting someone. Inside it, he kept his most cherished belongings, his notebooks and photographs. Even when he slept, the bag was always close by. On the morning of September 24th, 1937, after celebrating the first birthday of their son Ayan, Saken was arrested at 4 a.m. I, Saken Seifullin, fully acknowledge that I was an active member of an anti-Soviet nationalist organization involved in terrorism, insurgency, and espionage. Since 1922, I have been waging a counter-revolutionary struggle against the old Union Communist Party and Soviet authorities, being a hidden Trotskyist and leading a nationalist faction. I participated in plotting acts of terrorism aimed at the leaders of the old Union Communist Party and the Soviet government.
Just before his death, Saken Seifullin was allowed to speak his final words. He said,
I, Saken Seifullin, declare that I made those confessions under pressure. Unable to bear the torture, I falsely accused my comrades. I take back everything I said before. When death strikes me silent and still, and I rest beneath a stone on the hill, only my verse will remain to recall a golden ember of a fire once told. My harried days will come to a close. No fool can escape what fate bestows. And though my poems will outlive my stay, who can explain how they found their way?
From Gulbahram Batyrbekova's memoirs, they say there was an old tradition. When a man died, they would release his horse into the steppe and set the eagle free, while his wife would have her braids cut off. Saken always admired my long black braids, but the one who loved them is no longer here. Ayan still can't seem to calm down, his heart broken over his father's loss. We were left orphaned together, and soon everyone started avoiding our home. I remember seeing this as a child when plague swept through our village, and now it felt like a plague was spreading across the land. You'd open the newspaper and feel a chill. Some couldn't even recognize their friends, wives, or fathers, and we too felt like we were marked. On the way to Kokshetau, my son fell ill. My dear child, the continuation of my beloved, passed away in my arms. After Saken's arrest, his wife and son were ordered to leave their home and the city. They couldn't find a place to stay. Everywhere they went, they were turned away, afraid of being implicated. In those days, people blindly trusted the party. If someone was arrested, it meant they were truly guilty. After all, how could the great Stalin and the party ever be wrong? Saken Seifullin's son is buried near Kokshetau, but the exact location of his father's grave remains unknown. It's believed that after his execution, Saken's remains were likely laid to rest in one of the mass graves around Almaty.
В лице Сакена Сейфуллина мы потеряли не только талантливого писателя и поэта.
In Saken Seifullin, we lost not only a brilliant writer and poet, but also a committed statesman, an activist, and above all, a true patriot. He was a man who poured all his energy and talent into improving the lives of ordinary people and advancing his country. While he was a revolutionary, a communist who believed in the ideals of equality and brotherhood and worked tirelessly to bring these ideas to life, it was the betrayal of others and the thirst for power that led to his downfall. History is filled with moments where even the noblest of intentions, when placed in the wrong hands, were distorted and turned into a devastating weapon. This is what happened with socialism in the USSR. Initially, its founders dreamed of a society where people could live well, happily, and freely. Remember the saying, "We're not slaves, slaves are not us." Yet, in the end, it led to labor camps, the eradication of forward-thinking minds and talents, and a short-lived regime. The Soviet power, for which so much blood was spilled in its establishment, survived just 70 years. The wake-up call came much sooner. After Stalin's death, the process of dismantling the cults of personality began, and those who were unjustly imprisoned or executed by the NKVD were eventually rehabilitated. Among the first to be cleared was Saken Seifullin. On March 21, 1957, the military collegium of the USSR Supreme Court completely exonerated him, ruling that there had been no criminal actions on his part.
Что в его действиях не было состава преступления.